The Bike Karma Bicycle and Cycling Stories podcast is made possible with the help of listeners like you. Supporters help to pay for the costs associated with the show. To join, either go to patreon.com and search up Bike Karma Podcast, or email bikekarmaguy@gmail.com for more options.
Episode 80.
Hello again and welcome to another episode of the Bike Karma Bicycle and Cycling Stories podcast. I'm your host, Tom Brown. I hope you're surviving in the crazy world of 2025. I hope you've come here for a nice break from all the craziness in the world to reconnect with your love of bicycles and cycling and our shared humanity through storytelling. Whether you're a novice or an expert, if you're an open-minded person who's just curious about bicycles and human beings, and you like shows like Snap Judgment and This American Life but wish they had more bike stories, hey, that's how this started. If you're new to the show, please check our back catalog. We literally have stories on everything related to bicycles, from fighting Nazis to mountain biking in Leadville. Today we start with a deep thought and follow it up with some stories from master storyteller Greg Honn, showing us that even the most disturbing trends in the bicycle industry have happened in some way in the past. You have a billion podcasts that you could be listening to, and I'm really grateful for you coming along with me for the ride on mine. Let's roll out. Will your favorite bicycle brand be around in 5 years? Does it matter? Sometimes your affinity with a brand can be very simple and innocent. I love a brand of mountain bikes from the 80s that was called Muddy Fox. The marketing was kind of spunky and said, hey, give us a try, we're better than the other brands, here's why. But the clincher for me was on some of the frames in the lug on the seat tube is a little teeny paw print of a fox. This is also the company that was credited with helping to break through mountain biking into the mainstream of the UK. But they had me at the little fox print. Sometimes you just vibe with what they're doing. But other times you're kind of aware of it. There's something nefarious going on. Are you being manipulated by the marketing in some not nice way? Why do you really like one brand over another brand? And have we just been through or about to go through a huge mass extinction in bicycle brands? I usually don't like podcasts where it's just one person talking. I really feel more comfortable sharing other people's stories most of the time, but every once in a while, I've been thunking about something so long. In my family, we call them deep thunks. That for this short segment, I'm just going to talk to you as if it was the end of a ride that we'd just been on and we're sitting in front of a coffee shop. We're just talking about the mysteries of the world. So what is your favorite brand of bike ever? Do you have a brand of jersey or a brand of socks or a brand of grips that really just like you are sworn to? And have you noticed just in general that we're living through the death of many brands? Looking at retail, J. Crew, Joann Fabrics, Toys R Us. For some, these were beloved go-tos for a long time and they were healthy, and then they got raided by pirates, venture capitalists in the night. Robbed, tortured, and then left on the side of the road. Oh, and that reminds me, before anybody thinks about suing me, these are just my opinions in this whole part. I'm not getting paid by any of these brands, nor do I want to be sued. But if we were sitting after a ride, I'd be wondering if you saw the same patterns I think I'm seeing, and what do you think it means? To me, bicycles and cycling are a window into the greater mysteries of life. Start anywhere and there's a story to be told and a lesson to be learned. Some really wise philosophers would say that impermanence is the cause of all human suffering. So you'd think we should just get used to that. They don't make your favorite tires anymore? Let it go. But more often we're in this panic that whatever we've found that we liked in life is going to be gone, so we need to buy extras so we have backups. Some people rip off all the tags and tear off all the stickers off of everything they own, but in the bike world there's a lot of people who leave patina on there to save those decals and preserve the story of a bike, usually through its maker and its brand. So is liking a brand part of our human nature? Yes. Are there good reasons for it? Yes. Are we often manipulated and exploited because of that? Yes. Is a brand identity real? Yes. But sometimes no. Sometimes it's fake. Sometimes it's real and then fake the next week when the company is acquired by another company. So when you become a fan of a specific brand and model of saddle, what can we learn about that? In the bigger picture, I think that the bike industry lags behind the regular commercial sector just a little bit. So some of the trends we see with companies just taking over and looting any successful business they're knocking on the door of the bicycle industry. I'm concerned, or maybe just curious, about what venture capital and all the badness that comes with that is going to do to the landscape of the bicycle industry as I know it. And then you throw in all the political and social chaos in the world right now. Is this going to be good for micro producers? You know, those single people who basically have their own shops and those genuine companies which are still owned by the same group that started them? Is it going to work out for them, or is it going to make it harder for them? Could we see brands that we never thought would ever combine to survive? Like SRAM and Shimano combining. Don't be silly. But after the last few months, who knows 10 years from now? The industry is marked by booms and busts throughout its history. Is there anything from any of this that can help us understand about anything true in life for ourselves? I don't know. That's what I wanted to kick back and talk to you about. There's a lot of bad stuff going on, and it's really hard right now to be a good consumer, one who wants to align their dollars with their values. You know, that small 3-person boutique brand is aligned with your values, but sometimes you can't afford that. I mean, I like to buy stuff from brands that I think are aligned with my values in terms of paying their workers relatively well, treating them well, not trying to destroy the earth, creating a decent product without planned obsolescence or without underhanded tricks to get you to pay more later. I'm a big fan of trying to do no harm or less harm, and giant corporations know this about us and they manipulate that. I don't want to buy products that are using exploitive labor, making people work in factories, in prisons. I don't want to support legalized slavery. I want to buy stuff that's organic, fair trade, not genetically modified towards some corporation's sales goals. And gosh darn it, most multinational corporations don't put that type of information on the label so that you can read it if it doesn't work for them. A lot of it I call off-air, rhymes with duckery, which is the word that it feels like the right word, but I think since this is a family show, we'll say hijinks, done by big giant companies, is done behind a brand that you knew or know or used to know. And so somebody might say, so what? Is it intrinsically a good product or a bad product? If it was a bicycle, intrinsically, is it a good bicycle or is it not a good bicycle? And I would say in this fast-paced life, we rely upon branding, rightly or wrongly, to anticipate the vetting of a product that we intend to use or purchase. And as much as I hate to say it, I think it's hardwired somehow into our brains. This is part of human nature. We're looking for familiarity. We don't want to test something for quality every single time we need to go repeat that purchase. We want to be like, that brand makes good tubes. I'll just buy another one of those. If I gave you cards with brand names of sneakers or food or cars or bicycles, I bet you could put them in order from bottom to top in terms of what you think the quality is. You might not say better. I bet most people would be able to rank them, even people new to the sport of cycling who have any name familiarity at all. That all depends on how you value things such as dependability versus bling. So we wouldn't all put them in the same order, but we definitely would have some feelings about those brands. Where does that come from? Myself, I don't care at all about Major League Baseball. Not at all. I think we all left the last game that we went to together before it was done because we just weren't interested in it. It was kind of cool, but it's just not my jam. So why is it then that I have a strong feeling that pops up in my brain somewhere? If somebody says Red Sox or Yankees, I'm all Red Sox. I'm Boston. Why? I haven't watched a baseball game for years. And yet I have a strong preference or comfort level with Boston over New York. So whether it's Monet or Banksy, SRAM, Shimano, Campy, or Microshift, with components or with bikes, Trek or Specialized, Some hit with some people and some miss. I love Le Mans bikes. They were made by Trek, but they were branded Le Mans. I think Greg LeMond is cool. I've been trying to get him on the show for a while, but he's got another company making Le Mans bikes again. But the Le Mans that I have are all from like the late 90s, and I'm pretty sure he didn't touch them, but his name's on them and it looks cool, and I like thinking of being cool like him when I'm on my bike. That's not all of it. It's like a very, very small part of it, but it just kind of like is, yeah, I like those. I'm 99% sure that one of my Le Mans bikes was ridden by a gold medalist in the Olympics, Marty the Blade Nostine. I believe he rode it like 6 years after his Olympics, but it's still one of the fastest guys on earth. May have rode the bike that I have. There's a picture of him riding this bike, which looks like mine, and his name was on the top tube on this bike that I have. Does it change the bike in any way? Well, emotionally, yeah, but physically, probably not, unless you believe in Locard's exchange principle, which says that every object leaves a trace, or maybe you believe in quantum entanglement, that whenever matter touches other matter, it leaves behind some association between them. I've got one label associating the bike with Le Mans. I've got another sticker that associates it with Marty. The point I'm trying to get at is the intrinsic value of an item is only one part of how we perceive its value emotionally. If you had a 1970s Columbia 10-speed, you might not value it very much emotionally. But if there was a picture of Elvis touching that bike, that exact bike, well, for me and a lot of other people, the value would go up dramatically. This is a bike that Elvis touched. Intrinsically, it's still the same bike, but that little touch by the king Elvis Presley, if you've got the provenance, you've got something way more important than an old 10-speed. For the previous 50 years, we've been conditioned as a society, maybe some people more than others, that a brand name represents quality. Maybe even for the last 200 years. Part of this agreement was that there was somebody behind the brand, a person or people who actually had an investment in that brand name. And the unsaid, unarticulated agreement was that they would never let something so low in quality that would degrade their brand get out into the public. And from the consumer's perspective, you would be kind of assured that there would be some minimal level of quality if there was a name brand, so you'd be willing to spend up a little bit more over a brand that you've never heard of before. Occasionally, you would relish in the fact that you discovered a brand, you discovered a diamond in the rough, that value item that performs just as well as the name brands. My dad got a $5 watch once that lasted him 20 years. He loved that brand because he discovered it as a diamond in the rough before anybody knew about this brand. This was a long time ago, but it was at a store called Spags, and there was a barrel full of Armatron digital watches. Nobody we knew had ever heard of that brand before. 10 years later, you started seeing it everywhere. So let's bring it back to bikes. There's a lot of people looking for those diamonds in the rough online. I've heard thousands of stories about people who've ordered no-name, quote-unquote, carbon wheel sets from overseas on Alibaba or other platforms at unbelievably low prices. And the results run all the way from a catastrophic failure to, oh my gosh, these are better than anything I've ever seen. The lack of a label that's recognizable as a brand allows some people to think that just taking the brand off, somebody could make just as good a wheel set and pass on the savings to them. The same thing with chains, the same thing with frames, the same thing with every part you could think about for your bicycle. There is a name brand from a company that supposedly has people who are concerned about the reputation of the brand, but then there's an overwhelming amount of knockoffs or what people think are knockoffs. Because without vetting the item yourself or having someone at a trusted bike shop vet the item, there's really no way of knowing the level of quality of a product until you get it. So here's another thing about us. We are extremely hopeful as human beings because nature doesn't do a switcheroo when we find stuff in nature. You want to think that you're clever at finding the same exact product for significantly less, and then you need to come up with a reason for it. And when you spell it all out, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Gucci is not making a ton of extra purses without their name on it, and you're the only one clever enough to see that. It's way more likely that somebody else is making a cheaply produced version of what you want. Unlike a purse, with bike stuff, someone could get hurt. And if there's a failure, there is nowhere to really turn to. So far, the two parts of the puzzle are, number one, we go to brands to make sense of the world because we can't individually check everything. Not everything can be individually vetted, but the strategy doesn't always work. And number two, we're also hardwired to look at being clever and trying to find something that is an unexpected, unanticipated bargain that's still at the quality that we want. Add back onto this the untethering of the brand name from the company in which it arose. For example, Schwinn's are no longer really related to the old Schwinn company. Many familiar bicycle brand names have been bought and resold and gone under different groups. We've all heard this urban legend style factoid that's thrown around. Every bike is made in the same factory anyway, so why bother? Not gonna go there. That's a whole nother subject for another show. But with the exception of boutique brands or micro producers, which they do cost a premium, but you know exactly where they came from, the industry is playing swapsies at the speed of light, while the word of mouth is still going at the speed of sound. All companies change, but for example, GT bikes moved around, been managed by different people, and recently, sadly, for a lot of us, they've stopped production on them. They paused production. And even though I know it's not the same company it was a long time ago when it first started and it's gone through many changes, I'm never unhappy to work on a GT bike. They have a basic level of quality to them that I have come to count on when I'm rehabbing bikes. So I am sad to see that familiarity go or be paused. Kona bikes, really nice origin story. Started in 1988 in Vancouver, but not owned by the same people for a long time. There are rumors about the original owners taking it back, but there was consistency there even when they were acquired. There was an effort to maintain the standards and vibe of the brand. My favorite bike right now in the world is a Kona Sutra. I love this bike. If the name survives, can I expect that a Kona Sutra that I buy in 2025 will be as equal a quality as the one from 2019? On the one hand, you might say it's not fair for me to expect that, but on the other hand, every business in the world relies on name recognition and brand recognition and model loyalty. They want to create fans. If I take what I've come to love about my bike and apply it to a future purchase, am I a smart consumer or am I falling back into nostalgia? There was a place back in the day called Nash Bar. Kind of reminds me of like the Aldi of bikes. Some very high quality stuff they made. And just like Aldi, people would say, oh my God, I got this amazing deal for this high quality thing. But is that the rule or the exception? If you throw in confirmation bias on top of that, once you've made up a decision about a certain brand, you can't help but give more credence to opinions that ally with the one that you've yourself formed. So Nash Bar and places like Bikes Direct will never have the cachet of the higher end brands. And that's part of their branding, which is value. You can today go online and order a brand new Motobican. As far as I understand, it has very little or nothing to do with the previous company that held the same name. Some brands have different eras, like there was Dawes made in England, a very, very economically but durable priced touring bike. The Dawes Galaxy is a legend, made with Reynolds 531 and other metals over time. Depending on what era of Dawes you get, you kind of rank the quality different in your mind. And that's from somebody who's a huge Dawes fan. You can still buy a Dawes bike, but what is it about the brand that draws you to them? Is it nostalgia? Is it conditioning? Is it just like picking a flavor that you like of ice cream? What if they started selling Dawes bicycles at Walmart? Would that rock your world? It would rock mine. What if Surly's were available at Costco? The weight of the due diligence to see what the brand actually stands for at any moment in time seems as elusive as Heisenberg's uncertainty principle about determining where an electron is at any given time. For non-science nerds, really hard. But luckily, there are many bicycle brands that are still surviving that have some type of reputation behind them and some people behind them who are invested in that company and that brand name and actually care about what it means. And maybe it's that passion about what a brand stands for or says they stand for is what initially hooks us. And then the follow-up of 1,000 other variables such as did it last? Was it enjoyable? I'd be the first in line to high-five you if you found a no-name bicycle that was extremely intrinsically valuable in quality. You beat the system. You found that diamond in the rough. But pulling back to the big picture, there's a tangled web that I just wonder about. And I wonder how much of it is my own doing. I'm still hooked on the WTB SST saddle that was on my first really fun touring bike that I treated myself to. I associating that saddle with trouble-free miles. So I've picked up quite a few backups just so that I can forget about it. It'd be one less thing to worry about when I'm fixing my bike each year. And although they've failed on me, they've snapped rails twice, subjectively in my head, I still pick that saddle as my go-to for not worrying about it. I do get further confused though when a company decides to compete with itself. Mongoose is pretty famous for this. They had a solid reputation as a high-quality BMX bike company back in the day. And then at some point they started selling in department stores, big box stores, at jaw-dropping MSRPs, way less than any BMXs that were going in the independent bike shops. And everybody knew that the $100 Mongoose that you would buy, some would call them wall gooses, were not the same caliber as the $500 BMX bikes that you might get at a bike shop, or the $1,000 plus bikes that you would get at the professional level. Did the lower end have anything really to do with the upper end other than the name? Some would say yes, some would say no. Some people think it was a horrible move that Mongoose was trying to sell professional level, really high quality bikes at the same time that they put their name onto bikes that were going for less than $100 or close to $100 that were very, very basic. They'd say they're devaluing their own brand. Imagine buying Nike or Williams-Sonoma stuff inside of a Target. At the very least, it would create confusion. Others think that that's one of the most brilliant business moves ever made by a bicycle company, at least in terms of the bottom line over that time. All the component brands have always had like different tiers of quality, and they've been very transparent about that. Shimano would say, here's our top shelf items, and you've got Dura Ace, and you've got Altus, and you've got Tiagra, and all these other different Dior, Ultegra, 105. And you would be able to see exactly where they were, what shelf they were on. And the other component brands did the same thing, even Suntour back in the day. In fact, Shimano had such a reputation for quality that they would take no-name bikes and put stickers on them that said Shimano equipped. So even if you had never heard of the actual bicycle brand, you knew that if they were using Shimano parts, even if they were the lowest shelf, that they had to have some basic quality level, or at least they needed to be fit for purpose because they had the brand name on it. The high-end bikes that ran Shimano didn't need to have that sticker because there already was an expectation of quality. But the no-name took advantage of that Shimano equipped sticker. I myself found a diamond in the rough once. I was out of grad school and I needed a bicycle, and I bought a Pacific Nomad at Toys R Us. The front shock was absolute rubbish, but the rest of the bike was pretty nice. Once I put some WTB tires on it and got a couple of bike tools to tighten up this and readjust that, things went pretty well, and I put thousands of miles on that bike. But to most people, if I said a Pacific bicycle, they would think lower end. Possibly. So we have an industry where the landscape has some brands which are still tethered to their original company or some form of their original company, and we have others where the name has gotten loose and it can be put on anything. And becoming untethered happens so fast and so almost secretively that you really have to do some research to see if you're getting what you think you're getting. When I think to myself, this is crazy. What am I living through? Am I living through the death of the golden age of bike brands? I'm reminded of over 100 years ago when there were hundreds of different bike brands in England. For a time, they led the world in quality. Colonel Pope cranking out Columbias in Hartford. The United States was the cheap foreign competitor. New brands like Columbia lowered prices overall and threatened the established players in the market. So all of our nostalgia for our own manufacturing history, and yet some people I talk to claim that the United States was also cranking out a bunch of good stuff and cheap garbage at the same time, as we now look at that process repeating over and over again in the rest of the world. Back in those days, there was a bunch of bike companies, and Some of them, like Rudge, Hummer, Denelt, Hercules, and a bunch of others, were all taken over and absorbed into the Raleigh company. Incoming dad joke, they had to rally together. And Raleigh kept all those different names and would just basically make the same bike with different little accoutrements on it. Kind of like GM did with Pontiac and Oldsmobile and Buick and Chevy back in the last century. Raleigh was doing this with bike brands. Sure, you would have the bird on the crank of the Raleigh, and you would have the hand on the Rudge, and you would have the dancing people in a row holding hands on the Hummer. The decals and decoration were truly amazing and meant to capture something and hit a chord emotionally, like ride a wheel with Sheffield steel in gold letters on the top tube. Or another one proclaiming itself the aristocrat of bikes. For a period, they were all exactly the same physical bike, but with different decorations. Essentially, they were competing with themselves for which one you liked the best. And so that example from long ago really makes me feel a little less anxious about what's going on now. As much as I'm going to miss some brands, as much as I feel bad for the death of some quality manufacturers who are going under, as much as we might be living through a mass extinction of bicycle brand names, I think that if we manage to keep from going extinct ourselves, ultimately we're going to see that this is a cyclic pattern. But I'm still going to be holding on to a few extras of my favorite brand of tires and favorite brand of saddle, just in case they stop making them. Do you have a favorite bicycle brand? Or a brand that you despise? Do you know why you like the brands that you do? Is there an interesting story about that? For all of that, let me know at bikekarmaguy@gmail.com or on any of the social media. And thanks for hanging out with me while I rambled on a bit. Now back to the regular show.
Hey there, this is Seven, founder of Sprocket Bicycle Marketplace, and I'm here with your ABC Quick Check. A. Check your air. Make sure you have enough air in your tires. Your sidewall will tell you how much PSI you can handle. I run mine at 100. To each their own. B. Check your brakes. It isn't that great if you need to stop and you can't stop, so push on your levers, push your bike forward, see that it's stopping, push on your brakes again, push your bike backwards, see that the back one works. That's your brakes. Next, we have the chain. Also very important. The other day, I mounted it over my derailleur hanger, and as embarrassing as it is, rode it all the way down to the beach. So don't do that. Check your drivetrain and make sure everything is set up correctly. In terms of cue, make sure that your quick releases or bolts or whatever have you are securing your wheels correctly in place. It's never fun to see your wheel rolling away in front of you, wondering how you're going to make that landing. Okay, well, that's been it for the ABC Quick Check. And if you're looking to buy or sell bikes, check out Sprocket at sprocket.bike/app. We're available on iOS, Android, and of course web. Sprocket is the only marketplace that verifies serial numbers with bike index and 529 garage. We also let you keep 100% of whatever you negotiate with sellers. And the first listing is free. After that, it's only $1 per listing, and the money goes to develop even more anti-theft features, as well as pay our team. Anyways, thanks for checking it out at sprocket.bike/app. And please make sure to leave a rating so more new riders can find us. And now, back to the show.
And now it's time for the mid-roll gratitudes, where I just take a moment to say thank you. First of all, thank you for listening. If you've heard the first segment today, it's not usually me doing a deep dive by myself, so the next story you're going to hear is an actual story. Which brings me to my first gratitude, which is the people who share stories with me. I really appreciate it. thank you very much. To me, stories are the most valuable natural resource we have. They encourage us to think, connect, and grow. And whether it's a sad story, a happy story, a funny story, I appreciate everybody who's willing to share a story on the show about bicycles and humans. If you have a story that you think would be a good fit for the show, please email me at bikekarmaguy@gmail.com. That's bikekarmaguy@gmail.com. We could record over the phone, and it's not live, and it's lovingly edited. So a very low-pressure way to share your story. Secondly, what good is a story if nobody hears it? So I appreciate everybody who has shared, followed, liked, asked for, and shared stickers, all this to organically get the word out about the show. I've been doing this show for about 10 years now, and hopefully you can hear that the production has gotten better over time. I'm really happy that a lot of the stories stand up to the test of time. But thank you to all the people who've shared, followed, raised our prominence in the evil algorithms so that we actually get heard. I appreciate that so much. So this time a shout out to Rick N for asking for stickers out in Colorado. Thank you very much. Thank you to Mosin and Trent Green for following on Podbean. That's where we're hosted. Thank you also to Zekid Movepitin for also following on Podbean. And it's an easy one. Davey. Thank you, Davey, for following. And Ipid Frixo. Thanks for following. I would like to give a huge shout out to my community. Our town just won a Bicycle Friendly Community Award, and these things are pretty hard to get. So I want to thank the League of American Bicyclists for recognizing all the work in our community that's gone into making it a bike-friendly community, the Old Wethersfield Shopkeepers Association for helping with events like Bicycles on Main, which all May we're going to have close to 100 decorated art bike sculptures all up and down Main Street. We do the same thing with Scarecrows in the fall, and it's all free and for fun. Come walk in a historic district with a bunch of cool art bikes on display. That's all May in Wethersfield, Connecticut. We also have an upcoming bicycle show and swap meet right at Dabbs Center in the middle of Connecticut. So for over 10 years, it's been the second Sunday in June, which this year is June 8th. At Hamner Elementary School in Wethersfield, Connecticut. General admission is absolutely free, and seller spots are only $25, which go to benefit the WHS High School Bicycle Club. I want to give a big shout out to everybody in Bike Walk Wethersfield. Our local advocacy group is going to be a legitimate LLC and a 503c3PO R2D2 nonprofit. Big thank you to all my friends that I reached out to who told me about their favorite tire tread design for an upcoming story. You can still leave a message about yours at 860-740-2813. So if you have a tire tread design throughout your history of riding that's been particularly effective to you or particularly horrible, you can give that a mention either anonymously or you can give a shout out to your group or yourself or your dog. And I am still looking for Sheldon Brown memories. I've got more, but not quite enough. Sheldon Brown was a legend in the cycling community. You can call the same studio line, 860-740-2813. Just leave a message like a voicemail, and I will lovingly edit your comments and include it in the story. Lastly, a big shout out to my Patreons. They're a small yet awesome group of wonderful people who can give as little as $1 a month to help me to pay for the costs associated with doing this show. There is no salary. This is a passion project, and basically it helps to pay for hosting, stickers, equipment that I might need, stuff like that. So if you're interested in helping to support the show in that way, you can go to patreon.com and search up Bike Karma, and you can cancel anytime. So thank you very much for finding the show. I hope you like it. 10 years, 80 episodes, and over 90 countries, over 160,000 downloads. I appreciate your support so much. Now back to the show and some more stories. Every year for over a decade, on the second Sunday in June, we've done a bicycle festival swap meet in Wethersfield, Connecticut on Sunday morning. And we have this at Hamner Elementary School, and it's only rained like twice in over a decade. Last year, for the first time in a long time, it rained. And even though it was the second Sunday in June, it got pretty chilly. I managed to make the best of it though. I went underneath the tent with my friend Greg Honn. We only hang out once a year, but I love Greg's stories. Greg was an industry insider in the bicycle industry during the golden age of bikes, from the bike boom all the way up until the 90s. He shared a story about going in and working for Eddie Merckx. If you've never heard of him, everybody's got to start somewhere. One of the greatest cyclists, if not arguably the greatest cyclist of all time. That you can listen to in the back catalog, where Eddie Merckx was getting ripped off by suppliers, and Greg inserted himself to try and help him out. So because these are all no-drop stories, I just want to tell you the bicycle boom refers to this time in the early 1970s when bikes outsold cars for the first time in a long time. Somehow bikes, and especially 10-speed bikes, got super cool and popular. And somehow a 10-speed bike became the must-have item for people who weren't even like cyclists. Specifically, 10-speed bicycles, those drop bar 10-speed bicycles, became like a thing. People who were cyclists and who weren't cyclists went and got one. A lot of those ended up just hanging in people's garages for 50 years, but a lot of them actually got ridden the heck out of. Back in those days, the Christmas gift was to get a bicycle of some type, depending on who you were, because to kids back then, bicycles meant freedom, even if it was just getting away from the chores your folks wanted you to do and riding off. Well, Greg worked in the industry during those times, and I wanted to ask him just some of the stories, especially what was going on with the Schwinn company. Schwinn to bicycles was like Ford to cars or Nintendo to video games. Schwinn is synonymous with bicycle. The Schwinn company today, if you bought a new Schwinn, is not really part of the old company, in my opinion. Although, to their credit, they do stay somewhat connected to their heritage. Most collectors view it as a different company. They used to make bikes in Chicago. Their painting process is legendary. While some of their frames are certainly heavy by today's standards, they're still rust-free, many of them. In all fairness, not a lot of companies stay the same for over 100 years, but it's kind of like it's different. But as Greg tells us, what's old is new again. A lot of bike shops have been replaced or shut down or taken over by a chain. Walking into a Trek brand bicycle store, everything is in-house brands. But if we look back in time, Schwinn was doing the same thing back in the day. So regardless of whether you hear everything old is new again or same as it ever was in your mind bouncing around, let's get under the tarp on a rainy day and listen to some great stories from Greg Honn.
The only good thing to have.
Stop there for a second.
Yeah.
I know she's been wanting to talk to you.
What?
I'm getting wet, but I love this story, so I'm gonna
You can
just.
stick it in the tent here if you want.
Well, get over here a little bit, maybe. All right.
All right. What do you need to know today? My name is Greg Honn. I'm a manufacturer's representative long-term in the cycling industry.
Thank you, Greg. You've had incredible stories that you've shared with us with the past. Working with Eddie Merckx back in the day, helping to keep him from being ripped off
That happened to him too many times in his life.
by the sharks that swim around in the industry. The thing I want to talk to you about today is we were at the other swap meet and you guys were talking about the behind the scenes workings of distribution and people selling in the different brands back in the day. One of the things that's always fascinated me is the Schwinn model.
Oh.
And Schwinn was very exclusive back in the day. We were never a Schwinn family. We were always kind of locked out of that price range. And you would walk into a shop and it'd be all Schwinn and nothing else most of the time. They had a thing called the 500 Club, and they were a force to be reckoned with back in the day as a business.
How it worked.
They went under eventually, and it was like the passing of an empire. So I know you know all of this, so I'm just setting you up here, and now I'm going to let you go.
Okay. Schwinn had a lock on the independent bike dealers in the United States for many, many years. But they were good to work with if you worked a certain way with them. They wanted only their product in the stores, and that was called the Schwinn Total Concept Store. Now, many stores had Schwinns and other brands, but Schwinn catered to their Total Concept dealers. In 1968, Schwinn sold 1 million units for the first time ever. And at the same time, Jimmy Hoffa was president of the Teamsters Union. Later in the year, through 69, he shut down the Midwest in terms of transport. So he created an artificial demand for bicycles because most independent bike stores were Schwinn stores. Because of that, people couldn't get Schwinns. They were forced to buy imports. And Schwinn had been pushing drop handlebar to rider bikes already, as they saw a generation of kids that grew up on a Stingray, banana seat bike, and the next step was to sell them a Schwinn Varsity 10-speed or something more upscale, but mostly Varsities. There were tons and tons of them made. So what happened was Schwinn couldn't deliver for close to a year. They couldn't get raw material into the factory. They couldn't get finished bikes out, except by railroad car, because they had a railroad siding that went in and out of the Schwinn factory. But even getting parts in there, because they needed brakes from Switzerland, from Wyman, Union pedals from Germany, Union hubs from Germany, Ure derailleurs from France, and other stuff was American-made, like Ashtabula cranks from Ashtabula, Ohio. Same with the flat forks on a Schwinn, Ashtabula forks. Messenger saddles made in Danbury, Connecticut were all Schwinn labeled. They were sold under Messenger label too, but they're ones made exclusively for Schwinn. Park tools could only be bought from Schwinn in those days. You couldn't buy them elsewhere. So Schwinn was...
They had red handles back then for a time. They would... Park Tool made some with red handles.
Yeah, before Park patented or trademarked the blue color they have. So Schwinn suffered a bit, but they had made so much money for so long because their bikes were fair traded, meaning they were the same price nationwide. You could not discount Schwinn product. That went as high as the Supreme Court, who ruled then that it could be sold at different prices, but most Schwinn dealers wouldn't anyway. And during the bicycle boom, prices went up exponentially over time because of other inflationary factors in the economy. Raleigh from England was the world's largest producer, making probably 8 million units a year in the late 60s, early 70s. And they expanded production. They bought the Carlton Works, and Workshop north of them was the 10-speed place. So they made everything above the Raleigh record 10-speed was made in the Carlton factory for a while. Then later on was made in Ireland in Raleigh factory, and also by Gazelle in Holland. So Schwinn at that time, though, they still, when the bike boom settled down in the mid-70s there, and then in 75, there was a tremendous crash in the bicycle economy because the market was saturated, as it is now. So Schwinn at that time decided to close the Paramount division because they weren't selling upscale bikes, and along with Raleigh, they had been the two largest manufacturers buying Campanella parts in the world, but also other racing bike parts like Brooks saddles at the time, Super Champion rims, Berg Union spokes, Clement tubulars. And so Schwinn had a big fire sale. And they didn't start everything right away, but then later on, they started to import bikes from Taiwan. They were one of the first companies to go big time with Taiwan bikes. And the principals of the Giant Bicycle Company, which is today the world's largest manufacturer of bicycles by far, who makes over 50 brands, including 90% of all Treks are made in the Giant factory. The Giant started with Schwinn, and they bribed some Schwinn executives to come work full-time at Giant as well. This is kind of the beginning of the demise of Schwinn. Plus, it was now getting far too expensive to manufacture any bikes in Chicago because United Auto Workers were in the same union, in the Schwinn factory that they were in the Ford factory. So Schwinn decided to move the factory to Mississippi. And they built quite a nice facility down there, made some good stuff, but even down there, it didn't work out because there was too much competition now with bikes from Taiwan, later on from mainland China as well.
What bikes were they making down in Mississippi? What models?
Well, they made all the current models they had there, but they had quit making the American balloon tire style bikes almost altogether. And because now the mountain bike boom was coming too, and they're making more modern bicycles completely. And a lot of the tooling they had in Chicago was never moved there, but they had a fire sale at the original Schwinn factory where they would put everything on a pallet from different departments. They didn't segment the things out properly. Like on the same pallet, you might have some green Schwinn Stingray handlebar grips along with Campanella parts. At the time, I knew all the jobber distributors in the nation, guys that sold ordinary bike parts to shops, like Mashock in Philadelphia, Allied in Boston, that they sold the cheap stuff to shops everywhere. And I told all those guys, go to the Schwinn auction, whatever's on a pallet that's Campanello, Cinelli, Clement, Brooks, any racing bike parts, Super Champion, Berg Union, I'll buy it all from you. And I bought a lot from those guys because the stuff was sold for pennies. It was in an auction. Later on, they still had Reynolds 531 tubing left, a lot of it. I tried to buy it for Eddie Merckx, but somebody else had gotten there first and bought all the Reynolds tubing, because at the time Schwinn bought it, it probably didn't cost them $20 for a full set of Reynolds 531 tubes to make a Schwinn Paramount. And that, the time that all that stuff was sold out there, probably, a set of Reynolds tubing was $50, $60, and at the best price, direct from the factory. So there was a lot of stuff there that was very, very good. But Schwinn couldn't hang on to all that stuff. They were losing their shirt in the market. Later on, the trademark was sold. It's been sold a couple more times over. Pacific bought it, which was a big bike company that also bought GT. Cannondale was merged with that later on, and that all since has been sold to a big Dutch company. So that's where Schwinn sits today. But Trek followed the Schwinn model over time because they were Midwestern folks like Schwinn, and they saw that the total concept thing worked. But they enforced it even more because now they own 500 of their own stores, some of which do well, some of which struggle, like regular dealers.
Maybe break it down. What's the idea of the total concept store, and how did Schwinn and now Trek do that?
Well, first of all, Schwinn made many of their own parts. They had Carlisle in Pennsylvania make tires for them that only fit Schwinn rims. You couldn't take a 20 by 175 tire or a 20 by 1 3/4 tire, which is a Schwinn tire, and interchange them. So you had to buy Schwinn size tires from Schwinn. You can still buy some today made by some other manufacturers, but
like the proprietary cell phone cords, Schwinn had a proprietary tire.
Yes.
And they said that the reason for that was not to make more money. The reason for it was to ensure quality, was what they would tell the consumer.
Well, that was true to a certain extent too, because Schwinn stuff was made, very strong. It didn't break down easily, but the things were always heavy and clunky. Like if you had a 3-speed Schwinn bicycle in a Raleigh, the Schwinn was a dog to ride compared to the Raleigh. Same with their basic 10-speed bikes. But for American kids that were pretty destructive with bicycles compared to the European counterparts, a Schwinn 20-inch or 16-inch bike could be sold by a dealer 5 or 6 times over because they'd always be traded in. It didn't take much to refurbish them. I made much more money. The margin on Schwinn bikes, unit cost, was only 28%. I was making, say, 45% on a Raleigh bike or some imported French bikes by comparison. If you bought very big from Schwinn, you might save up to $5 a unit, which is not much percentage-wise either, but the thing was, the turnover was very rapid on Schwinn bikes. In the total concept stores, you'd often go in and it was so clean compared to the average dumpy bike shop that this is the attraction. Schwinn would buy a piece of property, erect a building, sell it back to the dealer long-term, like a mortgage. And that way, they'd have him locked in, they'd have a community, and say they would do a very good demographic studies and say, okay, this community can use the Schwinn Total Concept Store. If there wasn't one, but there was a local Schwinn dealer, would say to him, okay, we'll set you up. We'll pay for the build-out. And that was a big help to a lot of dealers who could not afford that kind of money. Maybe they could buy the property or a building that was not so nice, but Schwinn built some buildings from the ground up that were very big, impressive buildings. So when you walked in there, you go in, there might be 500 bikes on the floor. And then in the back, you had all the Schwinn repair stands, the park tools that you couldn't get except from Schwinn to repair the bikes. And these beautiful cabinets that were roller drawers. Schwinn would set them up in shops so that you could have every spare part at your fingertips all labeled, down to things like gear cables, brake cables, but the smallest thing like ferrules or replacement nuts and bolts for all the basic bikes. Now, fast forward a little bit here. As Schwinn was sinking in the mire, the name was still worth something. But The factory was losing money. They had too much antiquated stuff there, too many people to support. But the board of the guys at Schwinn always made big money, more than any executives working for any of the bike companies in the world probably, except maybe the owners of, like Peugeot or Raleigh or something. I was on a plane going to the Interbike show in Las Vegas one year. I sat behind the Schwinn execs on the plane. I could hear them discussing how they were going to cut up the Schwinn company and, get their 401ks out of there and stuff like that and sell off segments of it and just bankrupt the rest of it, which was completely intentional, I think, on their part. Because, they couldn't survive with the factory the way it was, even the one in Mississippi. They were losing their shirt in the market, even with the imported bikes they have, because now many other Java distributors, especially people like West Coast Cycle, were selling Nishikis. Fuji was strong. Mayata was strong as a Japanese brand. That these people were beating Schwinn to the bank every day of the week. And the Schwinn dealers they had that were deep with them for years were now selling many other brands because they learned they could make a lot more money with those other brands than they could ever make with Schwinn. And there was nothing that exciting about Schwinn anymore for the public. I mean, they used to be, for kids, they used to be in the back of every Dell comic book for years. Well, that got cut back as, they ran out of marketing dollars and things like that. And really, other people came with better bicycles to the market is what really hurt them. And they weren't willing to change for a long time. And I used to berate the Schwinn sales rep I had when I worked in a Schwinn store. Says, you guys are dinosaurs. Which, except for the Paramount division, they were. But even with the Paramount division, the geometry of the frames was okay, but it could be a lot better. It wasn't any good compared to a Cinelli or a Mazzi at the time. And, they had the same componentry on the bikes. Bikes rode okay. They used to give them to the Olympic team and stuff like that, but many of the riders that were Cat 1 riders wouldn't touch the bikes anyway because they were sluggish.
The things I want to ask you, I want to go over some glib statements or some urban legends about the Schwinn company and see if there's any truth to them. All right, so here's number one. Was Schwinn the ones who specifically made boys and girls models in order to sell more bicycles because then siblings could not pass it on to the other brother or sister because were they the company responsible for that marketing?
No, not so much. There were always girls and boys bikes since the dawn of cycling. The thing is this, Schwinn made a bike called the Bantam it had the conversion bar. It was the girl's frame, and you could make it into a boy's bike by putting this conversion bar. It was a fake top tube that screwed onto the bike. So that way, it always came red. You could always take the girl's bike and make it into a boy's bike, or take the bar off the top, make it back into a girl's bike. Okay. And they had it. The Schwinn Pixie in 16-inch was similar as well. You could have it with or without the bar in it like that, which is pretty smart because a lot of families were concerned. I got a boy in the family, then I got a girl, then I got a boy like this, back and forth, and we can't afford to buy bikes from them. Schwinn was always more expensive than the other American brands like Ross, Roll Fast, AMF, and that other junk.
So they weren't exploiting that?
No, they're just, there was always demand for girls' bikes and boys' bikes, but I can tell you, in 3-speed bikes for women, for adult women, women's bikes outsold men's 10-1. In juvenile bikes, when the banana seat bike, the Schwinn labeled the Stingray, became popular, they sold very, very few girls' ones. It was the same platform as the regular 20-inch bike for both the boys and the girls. But a girl's banana seat bike, there's a few floating around, some in very fine condition today. You can't give it away compared to the boys' bike, which commands a lot of money as a collector item.
Another totally different one is there's a story that likes to get circulated and people are sitting at the bar. The Schwinn company was pitched the mountain bikes by the Marin County crowd, which had invented mountain biking out there. They said they were that incarnation and they totally get credit for that, and that Schwinn passed on it because they didn't want to be involved with it, and that's why the company went down. Is there any
I would say that's not why the company went down per se, but Schwinn did have the first good mountain bike at an entry-level price called the Schwinn Frontier. And this is when Schwinn was kind of trying to get into a renaissance here in the early mountain biking days. And they were smart enough to capitalize on that, and they went to a lot of dealers that had never been Schwinn dealers. And, a dealer might run through a couple of hundred Schwinn Frontiers in a year because it's like a $200 pseudo mountain bike. Now, the crowd from Marin County, Gary Fisher, Tom Ritchie, all those guys out there, they were all road racers first, very good ones, cyclocross men too. And along with Keith Bontrager and the other pioneers of mountain biking, they created a whole new sport with that. They started with Schwinn clunkers, as they called them. They were the 26-inch newsboy bikes, some of which used to come with drum brakes even from Schwinn in the old days. But they would take them to the top of Mount Tamalpais and ride downhill just for fun like that. They were all counterculture guys, smoking a lot of dope in those days, but some very bright people came out of there. Very sharp people in terms of, Tom Ritchie today is an institution in the industry. Bontrager was sucked up by Trek later on, and Gary Fisher for quite a long time too, until recently. So these guys, they were pioneers, and Schwinn was a little late to come to the mountain bike business. $15.
$15.
And
It's a bargain.
once they did it, they did okay. But the thing is, there was no cachet for upper-end mountain bikes from Schwinn. They never had. And then once Schwinn went mass market and sold to places like Walmart, et cetera, like that, it was over in terms of selling to the really good high-end dealers. They might have Schwinn in a store just as a low-end bike to sell at that point, which is where it is today, which is a pity because the Schwinn name, I believe, is the one name, aside from Trek, that the average American family knows. Probably more people know the Schwinn name than the Trek name today still.
Yep. Schwinn is synonymous for bicycles. Right. Like, you don't have to say, what's a Schwinn? Right. No, but right. Even people who weren't even born say, oh, a Schwinn, that's a bike.
What most people don't realize is two guys actually started the company. One was Ignaz Schwinn from Germany. The other guy was a guy named Arnold, because the original advertising always used to say Arnold, Schwinn and Company. But Arnold didn't roll off the tongue as well as Schwinn for the name of a bicycle. First of all, a single syllable for a bicycle, like Trek was a brilliant name to put on a bicycle as well, for that reason. And, Trek sort of followed the Schwinn model in terms of growth of the company and how they were going to do things. And that's why today Trek has a lock on a lot of dealers, because they can't give it up. It's too popular. But at the same time, they can't make a lot of money with it. Okay. And because of the demise of the bike industry right now, Trek and all these other guys that bought far too much stuff from the Far East, where nearly everything comes from today, is stuck with a lot of merchandise and will trim their product line for 2025 as their competitors will dramatically. I hear Trek is probably going to give up 45 models in their line, which means they had way too many to begin with. Variations on a theme, colors, sizes, overlap, things like this. There's not that many consumers to buy those excess units. So this is the same problem we had, the demise of the bike industry in 1975, where we were dominated by French 10-speeds, Raleighs, and then the initial Fujis and Miatas that came from Japan. And the problem is, the United States public gets turned on to cycling every few generations like this, or every so many years. And there's, during the pandemic, there was a big rush to buy any kind of bicycle because you couldn't go to the gym, essentially. So non-cyclists bought bikes. Now we're back to the point where the enthusiast market is still pretty much alive, as it always will be, the hardcore cyclists. But the ordinary person that picks up a bike and just says, I'll get involved in the sport, are fewer and fewer, which is kind of a shame, because now we're in a situation where everybody wants everything to be greener with electric cars, etc. And what's killing the regular bike business to a great extent is the advent of the electric bike.
Just want to step in here for a second and talk about, we're not anti-e-bike at all. We're anti-crappy e-bike. So the ones that people buy that burst into flames, don't have standardized parts so that you can repair them and keep them out of the landfill in a couple of years. When we criticize e-bikes, we basically would like to see e-bikes that recharge themselves as you pedal. That should have been built into the very first one of this modern incarnation of e-bikes. We would have liked to see some standardization of batteries so that you could interchange them. And good e-bikes are good e-bikes, but the bad ones, yeah, boy. Anyway, just thought I needed to clear that up. Back to Greg.
The electric bike. People had it on the drawing board a long time ago. we have a flood of cheap Chinese electric bikes in this country with dangerous batteries that blow up all the time. And Congress has yet to do anything really substantial to prevent that, because the EEC market in Europe, you see almost none of that because the standards there for quality merchandise are so strict that a lot of that unsafe merchandise never is in the market there at all.
Okay, we're going to backpedal just a little bit. You were telling this story about the 500 Club and having 400 bikes and having to deal with Schwinn. Schwinn was used to being, this is the way it is, to their dealers, and then a lot of people would fall in line, and you had an experience where you had to stand up for yourself against them. And this is in the days when people would move through units after units after units around Christmas time. It was the Christmas gift for years, for decades, a couple decades. To get a Schwinn bicycle was like the top, and then some of the other wannabes were like, they'd be second. What was your experience with the 500 Club, and what was it?
Well, Schwinn had the 500 Club and the 1000 Club, meaning how many units you would buy in a year. And the guys that were already in the 500 Club when the bike boom hit in 1969 were more protected because Schwinn took care of those dealerships and so that they got delivery. And the guys that weren't in the 500 Club were pretty much denied any bicycles. They could buy parts and stuff, but you know, you were last in line and everybody was looking for 10-speed bikes at the time. So you wouldn't get any varsities, you wouldn't get any Continentals, and you'd have a hard time in buying the juvenile bikes. So here's what happened with the dealership I worked with in Greenwich, Connecticut at the time. We were a Raleigh Schwinn dealership, and the year of the bike boom like that, we had bought 489 bikes, and the Schwinn rep didn't cater to us much because we didn't buy a lot of parts from Schwinn, because you know, some of the same parts that were labeled with Schwinn's label you could buy elsewhere for a lot less money. Say like Union in Germany made the basic generator sets around a lot of bikes in those days, generator lights, and I would pay $2.95 with the Union label on it. Schwinn's price wholesale was over $5, about almost $6, and in their catalog, Schwinn advertised it for $8 retail.
And that was the same thing, just with a Schwinn label on it that said Schwinn approved.
Yes, because if it were Schwinn approved, Schwinn would always guarantee the part for life. And you know, very few of those things were filled anyway, so it didn't matter. You know, if you had a few dud pieces of something from one manufacturer, if you sold enough volume, you just sort of absorbed the loss. But the number 3 guy came to see me 1974 in the winter time there, late in the winter, just before springtime. And we'd had a tremendous Christmas with almost no Schwinns to sell, but sold over 300 Raleigh choppers, I remember that, and lots of other British and French 10-speed bikes. Comes in the store, goes, only 8 Schwinns here, I should pull the franchise. So those are 8 Schwinns your rep stuck me with. He goes, well, you guys don't buy enough Schwinn parts and stuff. I said, well, I'm not going to buy parts for bikes I'm not selling. I said, you know, if I had the bikes to sell, I'd buy more Schwinn parts. I said, I know you have them for other dealers. He goes, what do you mean? I said, I bought 600 Schwinn's bootleg last year off other dealers. He goes, that's against the dealer agreement. Well, too bad. That's what made me money. I sold about 1,000 Raleighs to other dealers on the side, too, because I'm buying almost 4,000 Raleighs a year. So
those dealers would get to keep their status by moving the product, so they'd move the numbers, but they'd also be not following exactly what the company wanted them to do, and they'd be helping you out.
Of course. We all traded stuff back and forth, all the dealers. We didn't care what all these guys from different companies told us. So anyway, Mr. Charlie Hewitt, he's the number 3 man at Schwinn. He says, you don't sell that many bikes here anyway, because this was a long, narrow store, not too well appointed cosmetically, but it did big volume. Greenwich, Connecticut is inflation-proof, recession-proof to begin with, so there's always money changing hands there. And we were the most affluent bike shop in Fairfield County by far, even though it didn't look it. It's very low-key. So he says, you don't sell that many bikes here. I said, come with me. I take him to the back of the workshop. I flip open a trap door to the basement. I said, step downstairs. 250 juvenile bikes in stock. Raleighs, Roll Fast, Ross, not a single Schwinn. He goes, okay, you sell some juvenile. I lock the front door. I take him outside. There was a passageway between us and the next building with a doorway that went upstairs and a loft over the next building.
Oh my God.
And I had 300 3-speeds ready to go there. He goes, okay, you sell some 3-speeds. We owned the building next door. So what we had there was a warehouse that would only take the consumers in there to get a bike that was not the model that we had on the floor. It might be the alternative size or color, but I had 1,000 10-speed bikes ready to go for spring. This is about the third week in March. And Mr. Hewitt just about had a cow there. And I said, look, you want to do business here? I sell bikes. I sell bikes hand over fist. I said, I'll turn this inventory you see in the store right now, which is about 1,500 bikes, I'll turn this 3 times this year. So I said, you want to play ball? I said, here's the phone, call Schwinn. Here's a list of 300 bikes I need. He goes, everything's completely sold out. I pick up the phone and say, the dial tone works, Mr. Hewitt. I put it down. He stared at the phone for about another 3 minutes, picked up the phone, dials the Schwinn factory on his credit card, because in those days there were, no toll-free numbers yet, and says, give me Eddie Schwinn. And he says, I need these bikes on a truck to Greenwich, Connecticut tomorrow morning. After that, I sold a bit more Schwinn stuff. I sold more of their parts. I sold a few more of their bikes, but I still sold more of the competitors because the profit was not there with Schwinn. Not for us anyway. It was convenient for a lot of dealers to be a total concept dealer, but when they couldn't get anything because Schwinn was short of product, what could they do? They could either go out of business or buy alternative lines, is what's happened. But that was the beginning of the end for Schwinn because they learned then that they didn't have the lock on the dealer business that they thought they would always have. They didn't believe anybody would be such a big competitor. Raleigh had their own problems because they built a factory in the United States too late. It was finished in 1975, just when the bike boom crashed. And eventually they closed. That was in Enid, Oklahoma. They were going to make the duplicates of everything they made in England there. At least to make the frames there, all brazed together and painted there, and they were quite good. But it was too late because the influx of bikes from the Orient then started at prices that were never seen before.
And they were quality.
They were good quality bikes from Mayata, from Fuji, there were cheap ones too, but there were very good Japanese bikes coming to the market, and then most of that business shifted later to Taiwan and eventually to China. Which, they make good quality stuff there today too, including most of the frames you see in the Pro Peloton today are Chinese made and people don't even know it. But that's business.
Mr. Greg Honn?
Yes.
I love your stories. I love talking to you. I love that I know you.
Billy, can you talk to him?
Thank you very much for
I love coming
sharing.
to your swap meet, even though it's raining like crazy.
Thank you very much for sharing your stories.
You're welcome.
Is there anybody you want to shout out to, or any place you want people to go look at you, or?
Oh no, they can find me on Facebook if they're looking for me, or LinkedIn.
And I always spell your name wrong, so I'm going to have you spell it for me on tape.
Honn.
Honn.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If you know somebody like Greg who's seen some things in the industry, anything to do with bicycles at all, from touring back in the day to anything about bicycles like we would have on this show, please consider getting them hooked up with the show. You can email me at bikekarmaguy@gmail.com, and maybe we can save some of their stories for posterity. Thanks. Thanks very much for coming along with me for a ride on another episode of the Bike Karma Bicycle and Cycling Stories podcast. A big thank you to Keller Glass and his band Mobjack for the opening and closing theme music, which we use with permission. Thank you very much. Go check out and see what he's up to at kellerglassmusic.com. If your story is waiting in the queue to be edited, thank you very much for your patience. The unwritten goal is to get one episode out per month, but it's not always happening quite as much as I want it to. In the pipeline are stories about bicycle rodeos, Sherlock Holmes trying to solve mysteries by using tire prints from a bicycle, the late great Sheldon Brown, more wildlife surprises on a bike, and if you or a friend does either bicycle jousting or bicycle polo, I am searching for a story on those topics. If you have a story idea or constructive criticism or a product or business or organization that you think might be a good alignment for partnership with the show, you can email me at bikekarmaguy@gmail.com. That's bikekarmaguy@gmail.com. Apart from the music, the Bike Karma Bicycle and Cycling Stories podcast is the intellectual property of Thomas Brown. All rights, including copyright, trademarks, etc., are asserted and reserved. AI does not have permission to train itself using this show unless it takes me out to a nice dinner first. And just once again, I'd love to invite you to come to my hometown during the month of May if you're anywhere near Wethersfield, Connecticut in the United States. We'll be having our annual art bike exhibition, about 100-ish art bicycles up and down Main Street. You just walk up and down our historic Main Street and take in all the different bikes. And this is all through the month of May. And don't forget our bicycle show, swap meet, and festival on June 8th in the morning from around 8 to 12 noon. Email me for more deets on either of those events. Till next time, keep it wheel.